Otis Clay and the development of Clay's Park, 1940 to 1966. Clay's Park, developed during the past 75 years on 415 acres, assembled from parts of several farms by Otis Danvers Clay, about 2 miles south of Canal Fulton, has gained national fame for its 12.5-acre swimming lake, the largest artificial bathing pool in the world, filled with well water. Clay's Park was also the starting place of the equally famous Summer Theater of Canal Fulton. A proper beginning is with Otis D. Clay himself, a great-grandson of Isaac Clay, a Quaker, who came to Stark County from Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, with his wife, Mary Pennock Clay, and settled in Plain Township, where he established the family homestead on a quarter section of unimproved land about 7 miles southeast of where Canal Fulton is now located, and 4 miles north of Massillon. His son Moses Clay took over the farm a decade or so after Isaac's death in 1832. It should be noted that in the early 19th century, Plain Township was much larger and included parts of the current Lawrence, Lake, and Jackson townships. This image shows the property line and location in 1896. The area where the Isaac Clay farm was built was located off Amherst Road in Jackson Township, between Fulton Road and Beatty Street. No trace of this farm exists today, as it became a housing development in the early 1990s. Moses Clay was born on the family homestead in 1823. He acquired this property and improved and enlarged it until he had 560 acres of well-improved land. He married Catherine Madison, daughter of Otis Madison, native of Virginia. His son, Otis Madison Clay, was born on the family homestead in 1859, and his grandson, Otis Danvers Clay, in 1887. In 1904, Otis M. Clay moved with his wife, Margaret Coe Clay, his son Otis D. Clay, and 2 daughters, 4 miles west of the old homestead, to a farm in Lawrence Township on Old Route 21, near Butterbridge Road. Otis M. Clay died 2 years after they moved, in 1906. The property they moved to was to be the Clay family home for 47 years. Otis D. Clay married Maud Krumloff in the late 19-teens and had 2 sons, Robert Danvers Clay and John Otis Clay. Shortly after his sons were born, the original farmhouse on this property burned to the ground. Nobody was hurt, but Otis was forced to temporarily move his family to Canton while a new house was built. Once that house was finished, they returned to the property. There was a deposit of molding sand on this farm, and it was there that Otis D. Clay became interested in the foundry sand business. He eventually shipped sand to 12 states and Canada through his business, the Tuscarora Foundry Sand Company. While Mr. Clay was busy with his foundry sand business in Canal Fulton, the Rowland Farm on the west side of the river, almost in direct line west of the Clay homestead, was coming to the end of a long-continued ownership by the Rowland family. This farm was located on Wygant Street, and its driveway eventually became the first entrance to Clay's Park. The original fence posts that marked this entrance are still standing. The Rowland farm never left the Rowland family and never had a mortgage on it until the death of the last surviving son, Millard Rowland, at the age of 93 in 1937. In the course of time, however, parts of the farm had, through marriage or sale, come into the ownership of other families. In this overlay, we can see the farms that make up the park as they were laid out in 1875. The main contributors are the Miller Farm, the Gesseman Farm, the Rowland Farm, the Lynn Farm, and the Hargrove Farm. Other small amounts of property were purchased from 2 other farms as well. Some land was procured from the Kitzmiller farm that spans both sides of Wygant Street, and another small farm identified on the map as JD, immediately south of the Lynn farm, was also purchased. Looking at old maps, it appears that the Rowland farm makes up the largest portion of Clay's Park's current footprint. Well acquainted with the layout of the farms, Otis Clay was interested in the passage of the land into the Rowland estate following the death of Millard Rowland. Otis visioned the possibility of converting its stream, valleys, hills, and woods into a beautiful park. It is said that he was inspired by previous entrepreneurial efforts of his uncle, Marshall Clay, who built Lake O Springs Park. This was a lakefront swim park located near Lake Cable. It opened in 1922. 40 years of digging sand and gravel had given Otis the feel for moving dirt around, and nothing pleased him more than leveling hills and filling valleys with bulldozers. He bought the Rowland farm in 1940. Right after that, the war started, and he couldn't start building the 40-acre lake until after the war, and then was delayed for lack of equipment. But he finally got the lake completed in 1949. The park went into partial operation in the summer of 1950, with 240 acres of 3 farms laid out. The 40-acre lake was used for both fishing and swimming. There were half a dozen picnic groves, 100 tables, and a few grills and barbecue pits. The lake was fed by Fox Run Creek and several springs. However, the 40-acre lake was found to be impractical for a sand beach and swimming because drainage from other properties coming down a steep bank brought silt over the sand as deep as 14 inches. So in 1954, Mr. Clay went to work to build another lake of 12.5 acre size on the Lynn farm up on Patterson Street, south of the Rowland farm. This second lake was opened in the summer of 1956. This involved the purchase of more acreage, including the 90-acre Lynn farm in 1952 and the Gesseman farm on Route 93 that included today's Melody Barn and amphitheater area, bringing the total acreage up to 415. At this time, Otis Clay sold his family's farm across the river on Erie Street and moved into the old Lynn homestead on Patterson Road. The second lake has 3/4 of a mile of sand beach, 2 feet thick. 3,900 8-ton truckloads of sand were dropped into the lake area, covering the entire bottom, and a continuous fine wide sandy beach, and used to also circle around the island in the lake. The island was originally a hill which was leveled off to within 2 or 3 feet of lake level. The deepest point of the lake is 16 feet under the cement diving dock. The diving dock itself is 210 feet long. The water is shallow all around the lake, gradually tapering off to 5.5 feet deep, then growing shallower to the island. The island adds to the beauty of the scene, as well as giving swimmers another objective. The swimming lake is fed by water from a 200-foot dedicated well, delivering 300 gallons per minute. The lake is emptied for the winter, and one can walk or even drive out to the island. It takes 28 days to pump it full in the spring. The swimming lake is protected from seasonal flooding by a grassed-over dike, so that even in flood time, not a drop of floodwater has overflowed into it. The swimming lake's original equipment, purchased from the American Playground Equipment Company, included 3 diving boards at 3 levels, a large diving trampoline, swing, 3 slides into the water, 8 aluminum boats, 2 canoes, and 2 skeeter boats that ride like a bicycle. On busy days, there were as many as 16 lifeguards. In the early days, the park was open the year round, with Boy Scout activities, cookouts, and hay rides. There was skating, skiing, and bobsledding in the wintertime. Picnics would begin on or before May 1st. The swimming season is from the start of Memorial Day weekend to Labor Day. The beach house, 70 by 120 feet, containing 8,400 square feet, is steel and concrete construction. Most of the dirt moving and construction work, as well as the erection of the beach house, have been done by Mr. Clay and his assistant, Bob C. Witherow, a very handy jack of all trades. This has been his first and only job. Bob Witherow worked for the Clay family for 31 years until his death in 1971. Mr. Clay had his own trucks, power shovels, and bulldozers. For the heaviest operations, a Laterno outfit was operated by the Garreau brothers. The views overlooking both lakes are superlative. The swimming lake view, with its background of woods, the gently sloping grass-covered hillsides, is a beautiful sight. Otis Clay had aimed to keep the patronage in harmony with the surroundings. No motorboats were allowed. Only park-owned boats can be used. No intoxicating liquors were allowed. Church crowds, and especially children, were catered to. 400 courtesy tickets were sent to ministers and their families. Children under 6 were admitted free. Church and Sunday school groups of 25 or more received special rates. It was said that the atmosphere encouraged people to act like ladies and gentlemen. The park, now with 2 lakes, was operated on a semi-private basis. That people liked this kind of place is shown by the attendance. July 4th of 1958, there was an estimated attendance of 12,000 people. At this time, 730 picnic tables, made by Mr. Clay and his crew, were scattered all over the place. There were hundreds of fireplaces and benches. License plates affixed to car bumpers suggested visitors from nearly every state in the Union. Regular patrons began to come from as far as Cleveland, and also large numbers from Canton, New Philadelphia, Worcester, Orville, Massillon, and Alliance. No longer hosting swimmers, the larger 40-acre lake came to be referred to as the Fishing Lake, and is stocked with bluegill and bass. Fish also come down Fox Run Creek from the 100-acre Fox Lake, 4 miles up in Wayne County. In the 1950s, Mr. Clay intended upon entering the Christmas tree business, having planted 104,000 of them in a field north of the Melody Barn area. However, this did not come to full fruition. The vast majority of these trees were not sold as Christmas trees, and have instead matured into a rather sizable pine forest that has been the site of several October Haunted Forest events in the 1980s and 90s, as well as hosting parts of the Yankee Peddler Festival, which began in 1973. Otis also planted 2,000 shade trees, mostly maples, which have seen their purpose fulfilled. In the 1950s and into the 1960s, hidden away in a wooded cove near the large lake were 6 caboose cottages, accommodating 6 people each. They were kept primitive, without electricity, and had old-fashioned outhouses. Mr. Clay was always full of enthusiasm for future projects. A deer park, a fairyland for kiddies with Goldilocks and a bear den, Little Red Riding Hood and the Wolf, Mary and her Little Lamb, Santa's Home and Workshop, and other storybook characters in bronze to be made in Italy. Also in Mr. Clay's plans were an 18-hole miniature golf course and a 9-hole pony golf course on 25 acres. The miniature golf course was built in the 1960s, and 3 renditions of it have been built over the years on the same site, up near the main entrance to the water park. Mildred B. Keller, who lived in Canal Fulton, was Mr. Clay's secretary for the Tuscarora Foundry Sand Company since 1938, and also first secretary of Clay's Park. Much of the credit for keeping the park clean in the early days is due to Mrs. Keller's insistence that it be kept that way. Great stones, bricks, and other building materials obtained from old school buildings and other abandoned structures were scattered in piles all over the park, ready for use. Some of the stones measure 3 feet square. Even today, hidden away in the wooded areas of the park, there are long-forgotten piles of square stones that Otis Clay procured from local demolition projects. Otis Danvers Clay passed away in 1966 at the age of 79, and many of his ideas died with him. But his 2 sons, Robert and John, who were originally skeptical of this park project, eventually saw the success of the park and took over where their father had left off. As early as 1959, offers to buy the park began to come in, and upon hearing of this, Otis's 2 sons immediately replied, "Don't sell it. We want it." Otis Clay obliged, as he would rather see them have it than sell it. Robert and John had left Ohio in the early 1950s to start the Clay Oil and Gas Company in Monroe, Louisiana. Robert's role in the business was to get the leases and make the contacts, while John, an experienced petroleum geologist, did the technical work. After Otis Clay's death, they both came back to Ohio to help continue the park's success.